Hello students, I'm Dr. Elkedas, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS, IIT Turkey. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In this lecture, we'll discuss about why is it important for us to go beyond simple representation when we're speaking about feminism, when we're speaking about gender. In this lecture, we have two specific agenda. One agenda is to understand what is representation, and second is to see why is it important for us to move beyond that. Representation means that you are speaking either for yourself or you are speaking on behalf of somebody. Now, when you are speaking on behalf of somebody, then either you are speaking for that person or you are speaking over that person. Now, for that person or over that person means that if you have person 1, you have person 2 and you have person 3. First person, second person and third person, each one of them are women. But the first person happens to be a sub-inspector. The second person happens to be an NGO worker, and the third person happens to be a tribal woman. Now, I am not stereotyping here, I am just speaking for the sake of argument. A tribal woman who is not aware of a particular language, let us say Hindi, but she can speak her own tribal dialect, goes to an NGO so that this NGO can speak to the SI because this tribal woman has been detained as she was collecting firewood from the forest, and the forest department caught her of illegal activity or illegal sabotage. Now, the SI, the NGO worker and the tribal woman, all three of them are women, but they are from 3 different classes, and because they are from 3 different classes, they speak 3 different languages, and because they are speaking 3 different languages, so the representation that we see here is that of a person who is at the bottom of the pyramid trying to get help from a mediator. This mediator is again going to speak to the representative of state. So, in this effect, there is what we see is a significant power dynamics which comes from their social and political positions. Now, the NGO worker can speak on behalf of this or can represent the tribal woman, knowing very well as to how the NGO wants to frame it. There is a possibility that the tribal woman is not even following the kind of bigger argument that the NGO has. So, in effect, and this example of mine doesn't come from a vacuum. It comes from a very specific discourse that we have witnessed over the past few decades, in which developmental NGOs as well as activist NGOs, they speak the language of either it is environment, either it is of protection of something, of conservation, or about feminism or something else, whereas the tribal women and others and the local people, they are speaking the language of livelihood. So, here what we say is that representation is deeply problematic. Now, all 3 of them being women, when they go to a patriarchal setting, then they become the subordinated, and here the man who is sitting, he becomes the more powerful. So, in this scenario also we have a problem of representation. So, that is the reason why women as a category is not homogeneous, point number 1. Point number 2 is that we have, in order to understand how it is heterogeneous, we have to look at the mechanisms of subordination embedded within structural, cultural and ideological formations. Feminist theory, Southern theory, and intersectionality, the theories, they have tried to look at the different intersections that are there in order to understand how different social locations or positionalities are formed and how these positionalities can be interpreted. Now, many times the limits of representation is that most often than not, they are state-centric, and the state and the representatives of the state decide who is worthy and who is unworthy victim and how their experiences need to be narrated. If you look at Kimberly Crenshaw's works, particularly when she is theorizing about Black women's experiences in the United States, she argues that if there are two women, a white woman and a Black woman, both of them are victims of rape or sexual harassment, then white woman gets preferential treatment because the rapist happens to be a Black man. So it is in the nature of a Black man, and this is Crenshaw's argument, this is not my argument. It is in the nature of a Black man to not only lure white woman but also desire a white woman so that he could rape her. Whereas if a Black woman is raped, that means she was asking for it, because like a Black man, a Black woman is also desiring to have those kind of experiences. By nature, she is like that. So this not only move up to state, but also the governing bodies of the state, the laws of the state, the legal courts, the NGOs, and everybody who is part of it, the police force. So this, what we witness here is that representation needs to be intersectional in character, and it has to be descriptive. It has to look at how media coverage works, how the representation in terms of law works, and how the violence is, or sexual violence itself, is coordinated and understood in racial terms in the West, in caste and religious terms in our country. The other example is that, or the other way through which we can understand, is that representation largely reflects dominant interests, not marginalized or marginal experiences. Why is that so? It is so because, as I gave this example of United States and Crenshaw, dominant interests are not just dominant interests. It's about who are the people in police force, who are the people or personnel in courts, who are the ones who are running NGOs or dominant kind of NGOs, or who are the local representatives. If you do an empirical research, you'll find that most of the lawyers as well as judges throughout the judicial system, they come from dominant groups, irrespective of whichever country you are living in or whichever society you are living in. Same is about police force, same is about NGOs, and same is about other kind of activities. And knowledge production also follows the same trend, because as I give the example, knowledge in the knowledge that is produced, it's again about who is producing a particular kind of knowledge. Most often than not, when, according to the feminists, when men produce, men from the global north or white men from the global north, when they write something, it is universal in character. Universal in character essentially means that if they are sharing their experience of what has happened with them in terms of class, in terms of race, or in terms of whatever it is considered that everybody in the world also has the same experience, or everybody else have to look at the experience of these white men in order to even justify their own experiences. And the moment a non-metropolitan or non-northern theorist speaks about it, it's always about context. And we as researchers, when we write something sitting here in India, sitting here in a place like IIT Roorkee, we are asked to write for a global audience. That means we have to cite the works, or we have to cite the examples and the theories that have been produced through experiences in global north and dominant global north. So if it is happening with men in the global south, think about what is happening among women. So the experiences of white women are first universalized. Then it was about women in general. So now if it is women in general and somebody is bringing a race, so race becomes one category. But then somebody will say, no, let us speak about the colonized woman. Okay, fine. Now we have one aspect as race theory, one aspect as post-colonial theory. But post-colonial theory is and race theory, are they speaking about the issue of class? Are they speaking about the issue of nationality? Are they speaking about the issue of ethnicity? And are they speaking about any other issue? In terms of post-colonialism, also, are we talking about caste? Are we talking about class? Are we talking about ethnicity? Are we talking about region? Are we talking about any other matter? So the way knowledge is produced, the way discourses are produced, we have to understand how dominant frameworks underplay systematic violence. And the systemic violence is what needs to be rethought out, and experiences need to be looked at. Walby has provided us 4 approaches to gender in political sociology. The first is in terms of politics of representation. The first stage is total omission of gender from politics, treating male experiences as neutral and universally representative, that I just discussed. Second is feminist critique exposed distortions in which male dominance is normalized, conservative assumptions reproduced unquestioned across analysis. And third is compensatory studies treated women as exceptional actors, focusing on deficits, barriers, and participation gaps persistently. And finally, full theoretical integration. What can be done? The first is that what can be done. What we can do is to have full theoretical integration, placing gender at political sociology's conceptual center genuinely. Now, as I said, this gender is not innocent gender. This gender is highly intermeshed, integrated with the idea of intersectionality. Otherwise, it's just adding women to sociology or to our studies. That is the reason why the studies need to examine structure, context, and patriarchal resistance. And Walby's framework is a critical shift from descriptive inclusion towards structural transformation in political and sociological analysis. But at the same time, we also need to understand, we also need to highlight how misdefining of gender politics happens. If a study focuses only on women and overlook patriarchal opposition, male agency, and gendered state practices significantly, then it is misdefining gender politics. Gender politics is not women. Gender politics about women, men, and the structure that they are part of. If we are not looking at the structure and we are looking at the individual entities alone, that means we are missing the wood for the trees. We are missing the grand narrative for various specificities. And these various specificities are significant, but we also have to look at how the structure works and how the structure is either making the woman's experiences invisible or they're making something visible and something invisible. What is the politics of that? What are the power dynamics of that? At the same time, we also have to look at the historical aspect of political activity of women. Now, and that too we have to look at it historically. Historically, uh, as many scholars have argued, and as we have also studied throughout our school days, our undergrad, postgraduate, as well as in general conversations, we hear and read about great men, the fathers of different disciplines. We rarely hear about mothers of certain disciplines because they are women, and most of the creative works are associated with men. This is not to speak about colonialism, this is not to speak about post colonialism, but it has been done historically. Whether it is our texts, religious texts, secular texts, or spiritual texts, men are always at the center of the galaxy. Women are peripheral, somewhere dependent on men. So what women have been doing is that although they are looking at their regional context, but they are also looking at the historical context and like fighting for their voting rights, fighting stereotypes, fighting or forming cross-class political movements, so on and so forth. Feminists also challenge sexual double standards. They also challenge how the men and women behave or how men and women need to be treated in particular settings and why it is important for them to be treated differently as well as similarly. Why men and women as workers for the same work they should be paid the same kind of wages. Why there should not be any gap between them. The place I work, the profession I am in, both male professors and female professors they get the same salary. There is no distinction in terms of our salary and in terms of our the gender. So if it can happen here, why is it so difficult to happen at the level of wages, that men and women they get differently paid for the same work, but at the same time this also happens at the greater level. A male CEO and a female CEO do not get paid similarly or same amount of kind of remuneration. A male CEO might be making 700 or 800 million dollars per annum for the same work. First of all, there would not be a female CEO. If there is a female CEO, then she would be getting maybe 300 or 400 million. Now, let me be very clear, 400 or 500 million is not a small amount. But when you look at a same person or two person, one male, one female, they're getting paid differently for doing the same work. That is an issue. Issue is not about men and women. It's the ideology that constructs this kind of differences. So intersectionality is about gendered experiences which cuts across caste, class, religion, sexuality and race, producing diverse lived experiences. And when we identify these diverse lived experiences of everydayness, we can also identify what are the internal hierarchies and differential vulnerabilities which are associated with these intersectionalities. So the experiences of upper caste men and upper class men are not the same as the experiences of the Dalit, Adivasi, queer and rural women. Now, as a matter of fact, even these four categories are not homogeneous. Queer woman who is an Adivasi does not have the same experience as a queer woman who happens to be Dalit or who happens to be an upper caste rural woman or upper caste urban woman. So let us not freeze these categories because these categories have internal dynamics associated with caste, class, religion, sexuality, race, so on and so forth. So gendered oppression is also multi-layered, and we have to peel the different layers in order to understand how the layering works and who is getting oppressed and who is pretending to be getting oppressed, and how are our reactions to that. Gendered state violence is also the significant for us because for example, Dowry Prohibition Act. Now, Dowry Prohibition Act was enacted in the 1960s when the feminists in this country saw everyday newspaper reports of young brides getting murdered primarily because they did not get enough dowry. So all of a sudden she would be in flames in her kitchen, or she would sometimes slip from the staircases and die, or sometimes she would slip from a cliff and die. And most often than not, they used to be burned to death. So feminists argued, they fought court cases, and then as a consequence, we have a Dowry Prohibition Act, in which it is a criminal offense for both the giver and the receiver of dowry. But what if I don't inform that I'm giving dowry or I'm receiving dowry? There's another way through which it is being normalized now. Look at the weddings that are advertised by Tanishq, by the social media, by Bollywood. It is becoming an aspirational act that weddings have to be this grand. You have to spend this amount of money in jewelry, in dresses, in cars, in food, and only when you are doing it, you are having a proper religious kind of a marriage. What is being hidden here is the amount of money that is being spent by the girl's side on all this tamjham. And the facade that is created, it completely negates Dowry Prohibition Act, because nothing is being given as a form of dowry, nothing is being taken as a form of dowry. Rather, what we are exchanging is our class, is our status symbol, and as a gift. Unless and until a woman or a young bride is adorned with a 10 lakh rupees lehenga or 50 lakh rupees of gold and similar kind of other jewelry, whether it is gold, platinum, or something else, then you don't care about your, or you don't love your daughter. So you have to do it to show your love. You have to have a grand wedding in order to show to your neighbors that yes, I have done something. So people are taking enormous amounts of loan to fulfill some of the highly regressive practices in the name of status symbol. And Dowry Prohibition Act cannot do anything in this because it is not a form of dowry. It is a form of gift, and gift cannot be problematized. But at the same time, what it also does is that it fixes both the giver and the receiver as part of the problem. And there's less and less of reporting in that. So dowry, the way it has morphed itself, the way it has transformed itself, could be part of structural violence. But even after spending so much of money, it does not matter, because many times, although nowadays it is not being reported as much, and as such, brides are still being killed for dowries. So what we need to understand is the recognition of structural gendered violence and how we can analyze it. So everyday political practice also needs to be identified and looked at, like how Judith Butler speaks about performativity, and what are the repeated behaviors that are shaping political institutions and public lives, and how politicians strategically perform gender norms depending on party identity, crisis, context, or institutional expectations that need to be observed. So, as a way, some of the women religious leaders are now becoming or now showing saintliness. They come on national television, they come on certain kind of other channels, and they speak in the same language, they behave in the same language as their male counterparts. Now, we can argue that this has nothing to do with gender. It's just that they're part of a capitalist system in which they're using religion and religious spaces to gather and make as much money as possible. So we have to be careful as to how some of these aspects are being understood, some of these aspects are being said about. In essence, what I'm trying to say is that we have to be very, very careful in the way hidden transcripts are working, are a work not only that of the people who are marginalized, subordinated, and the subaltern classes, but also how people at the top also are working their own hidden transcripts, which is quite different from the people who are at the bottom. And once it is done, once we are aware of it, it is very fascinating to understand how it is being shown. So, political sociology is not something you go out there and do. Political sociology is all about understanding our own surrounding, being reflective about what is happening around us. And the meaning of this course or the motto of this course is to make you aware of that, to use some of these reflections in your day-to-day lives, to make you understand how things happen around you, how things happen around us, because you might join this course, pass this exam, but if you're not able to reflect on what is happening around you, then there's no meaning in understanding this course or even reading this course. So, in a way, what representation, beyond representation means is that we have to understand the agency resistance and beyond victimhood aspects of gender and particularly women, because they're not just victims, they are also agential, because as I said, they have been resisting since ages. It's just that we have not been documenting them properly. Once we start documenting them, once the women themselves start documenting it, then we would know what are the different experiences that we have, what are the different experiences of different kind of groups, including women, and the different classifications among women that are there. So now one of the questions that I have for you is, how does intersectionality challenge the idea of a unified category of women in political analysis? And these are some of the references. Thank you.